scene today. Look how busy the harbour is.
Yes, quite marvellous. Though I must say, that carriage nearly splashed us.
Welcome to my first part in what I hope to be multiple pieces on the Dunsmuir family and their impact on Vancouver Island, Vancouver, and Western Canada as a whole. They had such a humongous impact on our economy, on our culture. There's monuments to this day built on the family's name. We have 2 castles in the city I live alone, both contributed by the Dunsmuir family, and they are absolutely fascinating.
A fixture atop the hill in Rockland since 1890, Cragderrick Castle is a repository of many of the city and province's defining stories, both pleasant and not. Its primary tale is that of the both loved and loathed coal baron Robert Dunsmuir, his wife, Joan, and their family. Construction of the castle started in 1887 and finished in 1890, but Robert didn't live to see it, dying in 1889 of renal failure. Joan moved in with 2 orphaned grandchildren and 3 unmarried daughters and lived there until her death in 1908. The castle's role in the community has been reinvented several times since, first as a military hospital after the First World War, as Victoria College, the nascent University of Victoria, as home to the Victoria School Board and the Victoria Conservatory of Music, and finally, as a National Historic Site. Published in late 2025, Cragderrick Reconstructed. The story of the castle's design and construction was written by historian Jim Wolfe and published by the Cragderrick Castle Historical Society. This abridged excerpt looks at the homes where the Dunsmuirs lived as they evolved from HBC indentured Scottish immigrants living in barracks with dirt floors to the wealthiest family in Western Canada. Moira Dan, president of the board at the castle and author of Cragderrick Castle in 21 Treasures, Touchwood 2021. Scotland. Barley, in Hurlford, built in 1776, was the birthplace of Robert Dunsmuir. In 1832, when Robert was only 7, cholera killed Dunsmuir's parents, his grandmother, and 2 sisters. After completing grade school, he was sent to learn the coal trade at a mechanical school so that he could assist his coalmaster uncle, Boyd Gilmore. Bruce Davies for Cragderrick Castle Society. Robert Dunsmuir was born in 1825, the eldest child of James and Elizabeth Dunsmuir of Hurlford, Scotland. He was named after his grandfather, a successful coal merchant and businessman. The family owned a fine stone house near the village and was prospering nicely. In 1832, when Robert was only 7, cholera killed Dunsmuir's parents, his grandmother, and 2 sisters. After completing grade school, he was sent to learn the coal trade at a mechanical school so that he could assist his coalmaster uncle, Boyd Gilmore. In 1847, at the age of 22, Robert met and married Joanna, Joan White, the 19-year-old daughter of a Kilmarnock spademaker. Their first child, Elizabeth, was conceived well before their wedding day, and 2 years later another daughter, Agnes, arrived. They were neither rich nor poor, and likely found a home in one of the typical modest Scottish stone houses of the village. The family later recounted that as a result of some poor investments made by Robert and Joan, they suffered financially. Forced to look for other opportunities to recover from their losses, they accepted an offer to work in Canada. Fort Rupert. The Hudson's Bay Company, HBC, in searching for experienced coal miners in Scotland, approached Robert Dunsmuir's uncle Boyd Gilmore, a well-known mining expert from Hurlford. He was offered a 3-year contract to come to Vancouver Island to help establish a mine at Fort Rupert. Gilmore convinced his nephew to join him in the adventure and financial opportunity. Initially, Robert intended on going alone, but Joan insisted that the family, including their 2 infant daughters, would make the trip with him, which turned into a 191-day voyage. The party sailed on the Pekin via Cape Horn, landing first at Fort Vancouver in Oregon Territory. After Joan gave birth to James, the family continued its journey, arriving at Fort Rupert in September 1851. The settlement consisted of poorly built defensive wooden walls surrounding rough single-room log cabins, with rough bunks and woven cedar mats hung on the walls to keep out the drafts. The families shared a ground well and central communal kitchen with a brick oven for baking. It was likely a striking contrast to even the most modest of homes back in Scotland. Despite all the sacrifices and hard work in trying to establish a mine at Fort Rupert, the coal turned out to be of poor quality. Eventually, Fort Rupert's mines were abandoned, after many miners breached their contracts and fled to the California gold fields. Governor Douglas instructed those few that remained to relocate 200 miles south, to the future site of Nanaimo, where Snuneymuxw First Nations people had located coal for the HBC. Those miners, including the Dunsmuir family, landed first at Fort Victoria, while accommodations were being built in Nanaimo. Nanaimo Company House. View of Nanaimo in the 1860s. The original Dunsmuir cottage, house number 6, finished in 1853, is the second house to the right of the bastion, with a picket fence enclosing the yard. When it was demolished in the spring of 1910 for the construction of a wing of the Old Windsor Hotel, this humble cabin was widely recognized as being the pioneer home of the famous Dunsmuir family. George Fowler Hastings, City of Vancouver Archives, CVAA 6117. In the spring of 1852, Dunsmuir, still under contract as a coal miner with the HBC, moved with Joan and their children, Elizabeth, Agnes, and James, to Nanaimo. The conditions in the new town, then dubbed Colville, were still rough, although an improvement on Fort Rupert. Although the HBC had promised each family a house, it would take some time for the company's small workforce of carpenters to erect all the houses required. The Dunsmuirs were to live in house number 6, the second house northwest of the bastion. It was a typical HBC log house, measuring 25 by 15 feet, built in the post and beam style favored by the French-Canadian carpenters employed by the company. However, number 6 was not ready, and on January 7, 1853, Mackay writes in his diary that the Dunsmuir family and Adam French had been assigned to house number 4. This meant that 6 people, French and the Dunsmuir family of 5, shared a cabin of approximately 12.5 by 7.5 feet. Despite the crowded accommodations, Joan gave birth to her 4th child, Alexander, in the HBC house number 4. Their house, number 6, was not completed until the fall. At this time, with the end of their 3-year contract approaching, Dunsmuir's uncle, Boyd Gilmore, and his wife, who had refused to move from Victoria to Nanaimo, decided to return to Scotland. Robert and Joan stayed on in Nanaimo to help establish the coal mines. Dunsmuir's original contract as a coal miner expired on August 8, 1854, and it was not renewed. Instead, the following year, Robert was working independently as a miner, with contracts to supply coal to the company. The fate of number 6 cottage after it was vacated by the Dunsmuir family, when they built their own first home, was tied to its location at the heart of downtown Nanaimo. It survived as a residence well beyond the lifespan of other houses like it, receiving many renovations and upgrades, including a pretty new porch with curly Victorian brackets. When it was demolished in the spring of 1910 for the construction of a wing of the Old Windsor Hotel, this humble cabin was widely recognized as being the pioneer home of the famous Dunsmuir family. Ardoon. The Bate family poses on the front lawn of Ardoon, circa 1895, after the Dunsmuirs left. Robert Dunsmuir hired his friend, local builder and architect David W. Gordon, to design the wood-frame 2-story cottage with decorative bay and dormer windows. The wrap-around veranda with gingerbread trim had a spectacular view of Nanaimo Harbor and its coal shipping facilities. Cragderrick Castle Collection, M112. In 1857, Dunsmuir was able to acquire 4 town lots at the corner of Wallace and Albert Street on the opposite side of the ravine from the old town site and near the new coal mine known as Dunsmuir's Level. He engaged local carpenters to erect a large hand-hewn log house that followed the traditional methods of the French-Canadian style of post and frame construction. One historic photograph of the property shows the original single-story whitewashed cottage, with 2 masonry chimneys and a few outbuildings. At this house, away from the old town site, the Dunsmuirs lived in privacy and more comfort than they had yet experienced. They cleared the property for a small yard and the requisite piggery and cow barn. Across the steep but sunny slope they planted a large kitchen garden and an orchard of apple, plum, and peach trees. After nearly a decade of living in the rough and close quarters of the company town, owning their own home and land was an important achievement. Some 15 years later, when they needed a larger house, they chose to demolish their old home and rebuild on the same site. In 1869, Robert discovered and secured title to the massive coal deposit at what was to become the mine known as Wellington, north of Nanaimo. He was on his way to becoming very wealthy. Within 3 years, with his new status as a mine owner, and now having the means, he initiated the construction of the largest and most prestigious house in Nanaimo, begun in 1872 and completed in 1873. Dunsmuir hired his friend, a well-known local builder and architect, David W. Gordon, to design this residence that the family named Ardoon. Set on a rubble stone foundation, Ardoon was a typical cross-gabled wood-frame two-story cottage. It was clad in shiplap siding, with decorative bay and dormer windows, gables with bargeboards and finials, and a modest wraparound veranda with gingerbread trim. Heated with the best Wellington coal from the Dunsmuir mines, the house boasted 2 large brick chimneys for its many fireplaces and stoves. The house was intentionally sited on a prominence, and the front veranda had a spectacular view overlooking the Nanaimo harbor and its coal shipping facilities. Its modest front garden was a steep slope, again planted with fruit trees and surrounded by a white picket fence. The rear of the property was crowded with a kitchen garden and several outbuildings, including a stable. In the 1881 census, the Dunsmuir household included Robert and Joan Dunsmuir, their 5 youngest daughters, an English servant named Sarah Hooper, a Swedish gardener and coachman named John Fredrickson, and Jim, a Chinese cook. Ardoon was the scene of many memorable family gatherings, including the wedding reception of daughter Marion to Charles Houghton in 1879. As the wealth and prominence of the Dunsmuirs grew, Ardoon also became a focal point for entertaining prominent guests related to their business ventures and Nanaimo's wider civic aspirations. When Sir Charles Tupper, the federal minister of railways, visited Nanaimo on an official tour in August 1881, he and his wife were hosted overnight by the Dunsmuirs at Ardoon and were given a tour of the Wellington collieries. As the owner of a productive mine, Robert was also an employer of many people, and relationships with his miners were strained at times. During the Wellington mine strike of 1877, following an attempt by the sheriff to evict striking miners from company cottages, a crowd of around 200 people, including outraged miners and their families, rioted outside Ardoon. Maplehurst, located at 1937 Blanchard Street, at the southeast corner of Pembroke Street, the Maplehurst Mansion was a high-class residence near the center of the capital city. Built in 1863, Maplehurst was described as one of the best-built and finest-located residences in the city, having large grounds laid out in lawn, shrubberies, orchard, flower and fruit garden. BC Archives C08876. Early in 1881, as Robert and Joan contemplated new political and social roles, and perhaps the need to create some distance between themselves and the miners, they began to consider moving to Victoria and renting accommodation. On January 4, 1882, the Nanaimo Free Press reported that the steamer Alexander left for Victoria yesterday with Mr. and Mrs. Robert Dunsmuir and Mrs. Dunsmuir. They propose residing at Victoria for several months and have leased the handsome residence known as Maplehurst and formerly the residence of the late H. Rhodes. Located at 1937 Blanchard Street, at the southeast corner of Pembroke Street, the Maplehurst Mansion was a high-class residence near the center of the capital city. Built in 1863, the house had been the residence of Henry Rhodes, a prominent Victoria merchant and an elected member of the Legislative Assembly. Maplehurst was described in the local paper as one of the best-built and finest-located residences in the city, having large grounds laid out in lawn, shrubberies, orchard, flower and fruit garden. It was while the family was in residence at Maplehurst that the Dunsmuirs purchased the first lots that would become the site of Cragderrick. Immediately following these land transactions, press reports began to circulate that the Dunsmuir family was planning to permanently relocate to the capital. In April 1882, the Dunsmuirs widened their worldview by traveling abroad. En route to New York, for their voyage overseas aboard the SS Servia, they stopped to visit John A. Macdonald in Ottawa, where Robert Dunsmuir introduced himself in person and discussed the proposed island railway. On arrival in England, they first travelled to their former home in Hurlford, Scotland, and then went on a grand tour of Europe. Meanwhile, the provincial general election took place, on July 24, 1882. Despite Dunsmuir's absence, he topped the polls as an opposition candidate, running against the ruling government, with 29% of the vote in the district of Nanaimo. In September, when the family returned to British Columbia, they were welcomed in Nanaimo with a small celebration, an acknowledgement of both their return home and the fact that Robert Dunsmuir was now their newly elected member of the legislature. It can readily be imagined the mix of emotions that the family felt as they returned to their modest villa in Nanaimo after having lived briefly at the more spacious and well-appointed Maplehurst in Victoria and having visited many palatial hotels and residences in Canada and abroad. Their new status and wider outlook spelled the beginning of the end of their time in Nanaimo. The Dunsmuirs were also invited by the Lieutenant Governor to dine with the Marquis of Lorne and Princess Louise at Government House in November 1882. This event signaled their acceptance into the top of British Columbia's social strata, an achievement that would grant many new opportunities for their family. Their visit to Kerry Castle, or Government House, in the Rockland district, would have taken them past the future site of Cragderrick, part of which was already now in their possession. Fairview at Menzies and Quebec Streets, circa 1885. A villa in the Italianate style, with a narrow veranda facing Menzies Street, and windows with louvered shutters, Fairview overlooked the government buildings, reflecting Robert Dunsmuir's new role in the life of the province's political elite and his family's entry into local society. It's also where Dunsmuir died on April 12, 1889. Image A04728 courtesy of Royal BC Museum and Archives. After their return from Europe, while planning for their permanent relocation to the capital, the Dunsmuirs continued to reside at Ardoon. When the new legislature assembled in January 1883, Robert travelled to Victoria to attend meetings, sharing his private steamer, the Alexander, with other island members of the Legislative Assembly, staying at hotels as required. Such commuting from Nanaimo was neither convenient nor desired, and it was time to secure an existing residence. However, few suitable residences were immediately available. On September 20, 1883, the Daily Colonist reported that the Dunsmuirs had purchased Fairview, Captain L.M. Starr's former residence, located at Menzies and Quebec Streets. Designed by Victoria architect Richard Lewis, it was a villa in the Italianate style, with a narrow veranda facing Menzies Street, and windows with louvered shutters. This two-story house comprised a dining room, drawing room, small sitting room, bathroom, kitchen, brick cellar and 5 bedrooms. In 1879, the house began its transformation into something more spectacular. The British colonist reported that Captain Starr, an American businessman, had acquired the villa for $4,000, with the intention of making extensive improvements. Cited as it was overlooking the government buildings, the home reflected Robert's new role in the life of the province's political elite and his family's entry into local society. Fairview became the family's social hub. When Mary married Henry Croft, a reception with about 200 guests, the elite of the city, were entertained at Fairview. The double parlors could be opened to create an intimate ballroom, the scene of many parties. One of the most successful events was a fancy dress party held in December 1885, where all of the city's most elite citizens benefited from the well-known hospitality of Mr. and Mrs. Dunsmuir. Fairview was also the home in which the family went through the unexpected illness and death of Robert Dunsmuir. On April 5, 1889, he took to his bed with what appeared to be a severe cold. Within a few days he had lapsed into a coma and died on April 12, surrounded by his wife and children. The drawing room of Fairview, the scene of so many happy events, was where the deceased was placed in coffin to be viewed by a steady stream of mourners paying their respects. On the day of the funeral, the city came to a standstill as thousands of citizens lined the route to the cemetery, which wound its way up the hill along Fort Street, past the temporarily silent worksite of the castle. The following month, Joan left Victoria for a year-long sojourn in Europe with her youngest daughters, Jessie, Effie, and Maud. James Dunsmuir took his father's place as head of the company's offices in Victoria and moved his family from their home at Departure Bay to occupy Fairview in his mother's absence. On May 23, 1890, Joan and her daughters returned to Victoria. In September, Joan moved into her new home, in the castle, with her daughters and domestic staff, leaving Fairview once again for James and Laura, who were building their own new house. After James and Laura's new estate in Victoria, Burleith, located on the gorge, was completed in 1892, Joan leased out Fairview through her real estate holding company to various tenants. Eventually, it became a rooming house known as the Lethbridge Apartments. The house survived until a demolition permit was issued on December 10, 1952, and the Embassy Court Motel, now known as the Embassy Inn, was constructed in its place the following year. Today, only a small section of the original stone wall of the estate remains as a reminder of the site's historical associations with the Dunsmuir family.
Miss Canuck, Queen of Canada here. The Dunsmuirs definitely have a diverse impact on not only Vancouver Island, but the way that all of British Columbia has formed a lot of our economy, a lot of our lasting buildings, and the things that make Victoria the way it is and what it is today. And there's just so much information. I've been looking through the BC archives, and they have, between them, the Hatley Castle archives, there are thousands of pictures from the Hatley family and the Dunsmuir family, and they're known locally here to be cursed. And I might make another video on the Dunsmuir curse, because if you look at the way that the family has been, and the fate of some of the family members, it truly seems like the coal mining, the cruelty of the coal mining has come back to bear witness with this poor family. Leave me a message in the comments if you want me to make more videos on the Dunsmuirs, and please like and subscribe.